Hey, thank you so much for joining us at our Crosspoint Church podcast. Now, if you're new to our podcast or maybe new to our church in general, we're just a bunch of messed up people who don't have it all together, running after a heavenly leader who loves us and meets us right where we are. We hope this message encourages you, builds your faith, and strengthens your confidence as you continue down this journey of what it means to know and follow Jesus. Enjoy this message.
Well, let's give some props to the band, yeah. I tell you what, we're going to talk about how that song ties into what we're talking about this weekend in a moment. But man, happy Labor Day weekend, Crosspoint. How you guys doing this weekend? Really excited to see you. We're continuing the series at the movies where we're going to look at some of the spiritual fibers of faith that we find in these movies that hit the big screen. This is going to be a fun one looking at the Fantastic Four. And we got a whole bunch of people join us online. Let's make some noise for those in the online space this weekend. So excited to have you joining us. Wherever you're at, we believe church isn't a place on a calendar or a map. It's a community, and you're a part of that this weekend. And we are really excited you're joining us. If you are here for the first time this weekend, my name's Curt. It's really good to have you with us. It's a great weekend to be here at Crosspoint or tuning in online because as we already shared with you earlier, you have free movie tickets coming your way. So it's just one of the cool parts of joining us during this series. And if you are thinking of inviting someone for the first time, you've got 2 weekends to do that. You can still do that this weekend. You can invite somebody to watch online later this week. You can invite somebody to join us next weekend. Next weekend is going to be the final weekend of this series. And so this weekend we're looking at Fantastic Four. Next weekend we're going to look at Freakier Friday, the brand new Lindsay Lohan movie, and really dig into this idea of what do we do, with those places in our lives where we're dealing with bad blood? Because we've all got that. We've all got relationships where we have some kind of bad blood that we are experiencing. And so we're going to take some lessons out of this movie as well as some things God says and take a look at that next weekend. Now, real quick, I want to give a quick shout out to Crosspoint Student Ministries, CSM, our students. You guys in the room this weekend? A few of you are. I had the chance to spend some time with CSM this last weekend, and man, what a great weekend. You can see, man, it's so much fun. We got new students that are connecting, finding a place of belonging, all kinds of competitions and things that have been building over the last number of weeks, and students that are maybe newer to Crosspoint that are joining for the first time, some of our older students. The cool part is just the growth that happens, and I had shared a little bit at CSM this last week on something Jesus talked about, a mustard seed. I don't know if you've ever seen a mustard seed. A mustard seed weighs 2 milligrams. That's really light. In fact, if you don't know how much that is, that's this number in pounds right here. Math is hard, so I don't fully know what that is. We could simplify it by going 0.000044 pounds. That's 2 milligrams right there. So small, and yet Jesus would regularly, talk about things like this, and he'd say, sometimes what starts as a mustard seed grows into big things. In fact, he said one time, this little seed grows and becomes the largest of all garden plants with such big branches that birds can actually perch inside of it. And, scholars and people who are smarter than me have been talking for years about, trying to make sense of this parable, and so much depth that's in just a few words here. But the kind of big takeaway is that the kingdom of God is fascinating because it works in ways that you don't see coming. And it's been really cool to see our students connecting at CSM because they've been learning how God has a purpose for them, plans for them. And these small seeds actually can turn into, over time, some pretty big things. And this weekend, we're going to kind of talk about the same thing as we look at this whole idea of parenting and how do we parent kids, with purpose in our world today. Because sometimes what starts very, very small, you go, it's not really anything, and then all of a sudden, surprise, it's everything. And so we're going to tie into that this weekend. So just a big shout out to our CSM crew. And let's thank our CSM volunteers who just make that happen every single week, pouring into our students at such a critical time in their life. So this weekend, the Fantastic Four, this is the brand new Marvel film where we get introduced to the first family of Marvel. And so we meet Reed, Mr. Fantastic, Sue, the Invisible Woman, and they're caught basically defending the world. I mean, as you saw in the trailer, they're pretty much here to protect planet Earth, and they have a new arrival. They find out they're going to be expecting their first child, and this, throws them into this place where not only do they have to balance, their calling to protect the world, but how do they raise this child now with a purpose? And And they really believe that he's been given some kind of special powers. And so how do we steward that and help him become all that he's supposed to be? And so one of the things we know is that parenting is a very, very challenging thing. In fact, my wife and I discovered that when we had our first of 4 children. I remember coming home from the hospital for the first time. We put her carrier on our floor in our living room when we walked in our door for the first time, and we just looked at it. We were like, we don't know what to do, but they think we can handle this. And I just remember standing there and going, gosh, this is so daunting. And, kids don't come like with an instruction manual. And so being a parent can be a challenge. There's so many voices and opinions out there trying to tell us how to parent. It's kind of funny. I mean, not in the moment, but later on, like everybody's got parenting advice. You don't even have to ask for it. I mean, you just be standing at the grocery store and like all of a sudden you get parenting advice, right? And so as I was kind of preparing for this weekend, I thought, what are the popular parenting trends of 2025? And so I knew where to go for that. I actually went to the Google machine, went to Google. And you know what's cool about Google now? Like AI just immediately shows up and it kind of summarizes all these thoughts for you. So I want to share with you, this was what AI said are kind of the parenting trends of 2025. They said we're emphasizing empathy, emotional intelligence, digital wellness, moving away from like helicoptering and authoritarianism with a gentle community focus. And some of the methods include fostering resilience, prioritizing parental self-care, encouraging childhood independence. This is through things like, free play, responsibility. And you look at that and you go, okay, those are things I can get behind. And it just made me curious. I thought, how has parenting changed over the last 100 years? So I put that into the Google, and this is what AI told me about that. 100 years ago, parenting was quite different. It said that back then it was largely influenced by behaviorists theories that really promoted this strict, scheduled, detached approach to parenting. And it was about discipline, it was about routine, it was about emotional distance, any affection or motherly love. I mean, that was dangerous, you're gonna spoil the kid. I mean, which is very, very different than we see today, right? And so, it was fascinating because then I thought, well, I wonder what the common things are. Like, has everything changed? Are there some commonalities? And so I asked Google that. And again, AI gave us like some responses. I'll show you what they said. They said that the most consistent advice from 1925 to 2025 focuses on the importance of consistency and structure, along with responsive and warm parenting. And this last statement was interesting. While the specific methods and priorities have shifted dramatically over the last century, experts and researchers consistently advocate for these core principles to foster a child's healthy development. And so, tons of stuff you can get, right, online. You can, all kinds of resources, hundreds, thousands of resources have been developed over the last number of years. I think the bigger question that many of us, ask is one that also comes up in this weekend's movie in the Fantastic Four, and that's how do I raise kids with a sense of purpose in the world, and how do I do that on purpose? And, for those of us that are followers of Jesus, we can even say that a bit differently. We might say it this way: how do I parent in a way that God is pleased with? Meaning, how do I parent in a way that really allows my kids to fulfill their God calling on this earth? And I think both of those questions actually are really one and the same. And so I want us to look at that this weekend. And so as we kind of dive into this, I want to start with one of the most popular parenting scriptures in the Bible. And I realize not all of us are parents. Some of us are hoping to be parents one day. Some of us are grandparenting. Some of us are uncling, aunting, fostering. And so we might just be raising someone in a context. And so, but this is one of the most popular scriptures right here, which is Proverbs 22, which says, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, there's some other translations. In fact, the NIV version says, start children off in the way they should go. If we look at the Message translation, it says, point your kids in the right direction. And so right off the bat, we see these common denominators, these action words, which are, to train, to direct, to start off, to point. All right, and so we get an action point right away right here in terms of how do we parent on purpose. And I want to take a look at this word train here for a moment, because in the Hebrew language, it's this word chanuk, and it actually is interpreted into the English to narrow or to make submissive. Now, the picture, like the word picture for this definition, to train, is actually similar to like a bit in a horse's mouth. All right, like that's like the idea. I know some of you are like, well, that's not cool. I don't know, I'd want to put a bit in my kid's mouth, muzzle on my kid's mouth. Maybe you're like, maybe I would like to put a muzzle on my kid's mouth. All right, no, that's not the goal. The goal is not to muzzle. The goal is a bit actually steers, a being. It's like a bit steering the child, directing, inspiring, cheerleading, steering. And then there's another word here in this definition, to narrow. Why do you think narrowing is necessary when it comes to raising kids with a purpose? Because there's so many directions kids can go, right? In fact, this reminds me of something Jesus said in one of his more famous talks. He did this sermon on the side of a mountain. All these people from all over the countryside came, and they were just enamored with what he was saying. They never heard this stuff before. And here's what he said. He said, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it, but small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." This has always been fascinating to me. Broad is the path that leads to destruction, but narrow is the road that leads to life. When you consider all the messaging in our culture right now, all right, is our culture broad or is it narrow? I mean, is our culture kind of like, hey, figure it out, you do you, whatever you think is, feels good, do that. I mean, that's kind of the messaging of our culture, right? It's not quite so narrow. It's not, but narrow looks like more like, hey, there's some like rock solid, principles and truths that, man, when you land these, they actually produce results. And so I think this is why Jesus says, hey, broad, it's going to take you some places, but narrow is the way where you actually get results. And one of the reasons this is so important is we have all kinds of influences, right? We have blogs, we have influencers. My girls will come to me sometimes and they'll be like, hey, Dad, I just learned this. And they'll tell me something. I'm like, that is absolutely not accurate. Like, that's not how that works. I'm like, where did you learn that? And they're like, well, I learned it on TikTok. I'm like, all right, well, we're going to make an agreement that anything you see on TikTok is not reliable, all right? Like, it's a good place to have fun and entertainment, not a place for accurate information, all right? And so, but we have to sift through all this and say, okay, what are the voices that I listen to? So I want to make this as kind of simple as possible today. And I want to kind of speak at a meta level today. I'm not talking meta like rebranding like Facebook's doing, trying to rebrand the brand. I'm talking meta like overarching narrative, meaning I want to give you three things that if you land these, you will find yourself really raising someone on purpose. Now, we have this phrase that we use around here at Crosspoint all the time where we say, following Jesus not only makes your life better, but it makes you better at life. It makes you better at parenting. It makes you better at, friending, whatever, fill in the blank wherever you want. We just find that when we follow the ways that Jesus, shows us that, gosh, we just find that life is so much better and we're so much better at life. And so the fact that you're here today, and I know every single weekend we have people all across the spectrum on the spiritual, from like exploring faith to been walking in our faith for a long time. I'm just going to assume that the fact that we're here means we're curious about wanting to know, okay, what does God say about this? Like, what does God say about his purpose for parenting? So I want to give us three things that we can learn from God that I just think are foundational. And I'm telling you, when we lock in on these things, I believe that God, not only directs our parenting, but our uncling, our aunting, our grandparenting, our fostering, whoever it is we're raising. So first thing is this. First thing, we have to acknowledge that your children are not yours. They're not mine. We have to acknowledge that our children are not ours. Psalm 127, the psalmist writes, "Children are a heritage from the Lord, an offspring, a reward from him." Now, a heritage means a possession. An equivalent word would be an inheritance. And so children are given by God as an inheritance, all right? They're not ours. It means we actually receive them for a period of time, and we have to steward them, all right? Which is so important to lock in on. In fact, this past weekend, our family just went through another season where we sent another one of our kids off to college for the first time, our third child. And I'm telling you, it never gets easier. If you've never done this, I'm like, you think it's going to get easier. And I'm kind of glad it doesn't get easier because I'm kind of glad that there's some heartache and pain because I wouldn't want to be in a place where I'm like, man, I am so glad they're not here any longer. All right. And so I kind of it's kind of a bittersweet thing, but it's hard. And sometimes as parents, we can cling to our children. Now, let me just show you how funny God is here. I do a little devotional called Jesus Calling in the mornings. And let me show you what the devotional was on August 23rd, the day we were taking our daughter to campus. Here's what it read. It said, "Entrust your loved ones to me. Release them into my protective care. I'm like, really, God, this is where we're going today, huh? They are much safer with me than in your clinging hands. If you let a loved one become an idol in your heart, you endanger that one as well as yourself. Have you ever thought of your children as being an idol? Have you ever thought of a child as actually being an idol? You know, there's this number of stories, in fact, in the Old Testament. There's one between Joseph and his father Jacob where, man, they suffered terribly. And part of it was because Jacob loved his son Joseph more than any of his other sons. And he actually favored him. He did all kinds of things to do more for him than others. And Joseph's brothers, man, they despised him. They hated him. In fact, they wanted to kill him. They tried to kill him. They left him in a pit in the middle of a desert. And eventually, God used this whole scenario and brought about some good out of it. But, man, they had to endure years and years of suffering and, like, separation. See, here's the crazy tension. What seems sometimes like a personal love can actually turn into a misguided idolatry. And we actually make the ones that we love, we cling on to them so tightly that they become an idol. And God says one of the ways that you prevent this is by acknowledging that your children are not yours. In fact, when our youngest child, who's now 15, when she was about a year and a half old, she was dealing with a cold, sickness. And I was staying home with her for one day, and she seemed like she was going down worse and worse, maybe struggling, breathing a little bit. So we decided we'd take her into the doctor and went to see our physician at the time, and he's a very calm man, rarely ever anxious. And he no more than like opened up her onesie and started listening to her chest and watching her breathe through the back. And he got very, very intentional. He said, okay, I'm not going to call an ambulance, but I want you to get in your car and take her to the hospital right now. And I was like, holy cow, what like, seriously? He's like, no, no stops on the way. You need to get her to an emergency room right now. And so that's what we buckled her up. I started to head to the hospital, called my wife. She came and met me. And, lots of things flooding my mind as I'm going to the hospital. We ended up in the hospital for 13 nights. She ended up having a bronchial infection, turned into bronchiolitis. Her lungs were having a hard time at 18 months getting the oxygen they needed. They were damaged from some of the infection. And I just remember, like, praying and pleading with God and being like, God, we just can't keep doing this. Like, would you please help her? And there was this moment where this peace came over me. And it's like God said, Curt, do you really not think that I don't care for her more than you care for her? I mean, she's my child. And that moment was such a powerful moment because it reminded me that, yeah, that's true. I didn't create her purpose for her life. I mean, God created that. Right? I'm not the one who knows her future. God knows her future. And I just remember in that moment saying, okay, God, we're going to do everything we can, but I'm going to surrender to her because I know I can entrust her to your care. And that moment right there served as a reminder. Man, I knew that cognitively, but I'd never been in a place until that very moment where I felt the weight of what it meant to understand that, okay, these really aren't my kids. They're truly God's. And see, the moment we take our hands off God's plan and trying to steer it for him, is the moment that we begin to become parents that God can actually use. So acknowledge that our children are not ours. Second thing we do is we have to parent on purpose. Parenting on purpose requires two things. It requires intentionality and it requires discipline. And here's a really good question that would be a good question to ask when it comes to intentionality. What is my end goal for those that I'm raising? I don't know if you've ever asked that question. What's my end goal? What is it ultimately that I want for my kids? What's my mission statement when it comes to the person that I'm raising? Because it could be a lot of things. In fact, I hear a lot of things from parents at times. I hear things like, I want my kids to be happy. I'll hear parents say, I want my kids to, have it better than I did, which again, that will lead to you making certain decisions. I want my kids to prosper. I want my kids to be financially prosperous. I want my kids to be well-adjusted and emotionally healthy and secure and, to have a good life. I mean, all those things are great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with any of those things, but I want to take it a step deeper. If we're talking purposeful, I want to take it deeper. Have you ever thought purposefully, like, what's my spiritual end goal for my kids? All right, because if our kids are a gift from God, All right, and for those of us that are followers of Jesus, all right, he's given us a responsibility. In fact, the gospel writer Matthew actually tells us about a time where Jesus actually tells us what our purpose is, specifically, for other things, but as it pertains to parenting. In fact, here's what he recorded Jesus as saying. He said, Jesus told all of his followers, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, I want you to go, and I want you to, and look at what he says right here, the phrase he uses. He says, I want you to make disciples. I want you to make followers. And then he said, teaching them. The way you do this is teaching them to obey everything I've taught you. That song we heard a bit earlier, I'm going to show you love. I'm going to show you everything. I mean, this is that place where we get to show our kids what it means to follow Jesus. We show them what it looks like, all the ways that God calls us to follow him. He says, I want you to make disciples. In this weekend's movie, the Fantastic Four, Reed and Sue, they're in this constant tension. I mean, they're basically tasked to protect the earth. I mean, they're the protectors of the earth, but now they have this young child, and they have to balance that with their calling, with the commitment to their family. And there's a moment where they're faced with this really, really difficult decision with their son, Franklin. And I'm not going to tell you what the decision is because it totally spoiled the movie, and I don't want to do that for you. But it's a decision that's going to have an impact on a lot of people, and it's a decision that's actually going to significantly not only impact the trajectory of their family, but the trajectory of their son. And Sue and Reed, the Invisible Woman and Mr. Fantastic, they have this back and forth where they constantly say, we don't know what our son is going to become. We don't know what his superpower is. We don't know what that thing is. We truly believe he has something in him that he's supposed to bring to the world. We just don't know what that is yet. And it's fascinating because a short time after this, we actually get a bit more of the origin story of the Invisible Woman. She actually shares a bit about how her dad died at a very young age, and how her mom had to fight for her future and fight for her to be the person that she had become. And she lands, it's just like killer phrase right here. She says, I know what family is. She says, it's about connecting with something bigger. It's about fighting for something bigger than yourself. It's about having something that's bigger than yourself. Now, back to that question, what's that spiritual thing that you fight for your kids? For my wife and I, all the way back to our first child, one of our primary goals for our kids has just been, we've just said, hey, we want to set our kids up. We can't make this decision for them, but we want to set them up and give them the best shot at knowing what it means to love and follow Jesus. That's kind of our number one thing. And we want them to be self-aware. We want them to be others aware. We want them to be a bright light in the world because that's needed so much. But we're like, no, we want them to have the best shot to love and follow Jesus. I don't want them to use morality as their gauge of if they're doing well. I don't want them to use, whether they're going to church or not in terms of if they're doing well, or what other Christians are doing, or what other, friends are doing, or if it feels right. No, I want them to look at the person of Jesus, the person in the Gospels, and say, okay, what is he doing, and how do I emulate that? How do I follow him and emulate the way he lives and interacts with people in the world? So back to Proverbs 22, verse 6, that we looked at a bit ago, this idea of training up a child in the way that he should go. What does that mean, in the way? All right, let's be clear. Our kids don't know the way, right? Somebody's got to show them the way. They need someone to show them the way, which is why we're talking about this right here, because we can't pass on the way if they don't know what it looks like. And so somebody has to show them. And this is where discipline comes in terms of being purposeful, because this is where we as parents discipline ourselves to not only teach the way of Jesus, but also to walk in the way of Jesus. Because see, they'll never know what it looks like if there's not somebody to show them the way. This is one of the reasons I'm really, really excited about our fall journey this fall, kicking off in a month, practicing the way. Literally, this is what we're going to be doing. And if you've been a part of a journey here at Crosspoint, every fall we do one of these spiritual campaigns where we get to kind of go all in on a topic, and we get everybody on the same page in our groups. We're talking about it on the weekends, and it's going to be similar to some of those rhythms if you've experienced that before, but it's kind of a fresh take on it. This is going to be a brand new, different kind of journey where we're going to be looking at some of these ancient habits, some of these things that Jesus did, some of these things that people have been doing throughout the centuries to actually cultivate a growing active faith, experiencing God, following Jesus, being more and more in line with what he's doing in the world. And I just think, I know this time of year, fall is a time where we're naturally going, okay, what kind of habits do I want to change? What are the things as I get into these next few months, do I want to make adjustments on so I can maybe grow in my faith or grow in my relationships or grow in my personal life? And so if you're kind of thinking through those things, I really want to just encourage you to just kind of, put it on your calendar. I mean, starting in October, would you lean all in on this practicing the way journey? Because I'm telling you, these practices are things that actually take us to new places. And it's one of the best gifts you can give to your kids. One of the best things we can do intentionally with our kids is to learn how to better practice the way ourselves so we can model it for them. Because see, here's why this is so important. And it's another question. We have to ask ourselves, is the life that I demonstrate before my kids, is it bringing them closer to God or is it turning them off? Is the life I demonstrate, in front of my kids, is it bringing them closer to God or is it turning them off? And this is kind of the hard stuff, the real talk right here, because see, our kids soak up everything they see us do, all right? And so, we have to understand that if we want to show them the way, we have to know, okay, what does it look like to walk in the fruit of Jesus? In fact, the Apostle Paul actually gives us like some characteristics. He calls it the fruit of the Spirit. He says, this is what it looks like to walk in the way of Jesus. And he gives us a whole list. It's things like love, joy, peace, patience. And so we have to ask ourselves, okay, if I want my kids to be loving, I've got to know how to show them love. If you want your kids to have joy, then I've got to be a person who, demonstrates what it looks like to have joy. If I want them to live a life of peace, then I've got to be able to demonstrate and model, okay, this is what a life of peace looks like. I mean, if you're like, man, my kids are so impatient, you probably have to ask the question and say, okay, how well do I do on the patience thing? All right, if I, self-control, this is an interesting one. If maybe you struggle with self-control with your kids, you have to ask yourself, okay, how well do I model self-control? I mean, when it comes to the desires I have, when it comes to, alcohol or, whatever it might be, do I do things in moderation or do I have a hard time with self-control? Because our kids, they watch our beliefs and they watch our behavior and they can only live with the tension for too long before they begin to wonder if it's really authentic. In fact, earlier this summer, we were traveling with some of our extended family, and I'm always preaching kindness to my kids, and like, hey, when you're in a setting, like, be kind, and I try to be kind, and on this particular day, it was heading into the evening, and it wasn't one of my best days. I'm going to be honest. I was struggling a bit, just mentally, emotionally, and so I was kind of looking for a cool, like, chill evening, and we got together with our larger family, and somebody said, hey, let's go get ice cream. Let's go, like, hang out and get some ice cream together. And I just, like, blurted out, that is the absolute last thing I want to do right now. Spending an evening in an ice cream shop with a whole bunch of people I don't know, that just does not sound good. And everybody just stopped and looked at me, and they're like, oh, wow, we didn't realize you felt so passionate about that right here. And so, and I didn't really know what was going on other than I'm like, gosh, I don't usually say things like that, but I kind of, walked away for a moment, and one of my kids followed me, and my wife, she said, hey, are you okay? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, what's going on? Because, and my kid said, yeah, Dad, you actually teach us not to, like, respond that way, but you did, that. And I had to own that moment. And regardless of what I was dealing with, I had to be like, yeah, I totally blew it right there. Totally blew it. And that was important because I didn't want them to see me championing being kind and saying, hey, it's really important to be kind, but I'm not demonstrating that for them. So I actually, tried to redeem the moment by going around to everybody in our group and just apologize, saying, I am so sorry. Like, that was not the best version of myself. I'm not happy with how I responded right there. I'm sorry. I want to be helpful, beneficial. And so, are we modeling what it looks like to follow the way? The Apostle Paul in Ephesians 6, he says, parents, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with, and here's our words again, the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord. So he says, narrow the path, create boundaries, follow through in what you say you're going to do. Teach them, tell them why what they're doing is important. So we acknowledge that our kids are not our own. We parent on purpose, and this is the third one. Sounds a bit cliche, but when it comes to parenting, we have to trust God in our parenting. Now, this is fascinating because if I've learned anything over the years on the parenting journey, it's that it is a trust journey. That's really what the parenting journey is. You can't parent alone. I can't parent alone. Even if you're a single parent, you're not parenting alone because God is with you. In fact, He's promised that He will give us what we need. But especially for those of us who are followers of Jesus, and this is what's kind of cool, and even for those of us that aren't followers of Jesus, I mean, this is what he offers to us. As we think about like Easter and what happened at Easter and how, Jesus died and he was put in a grave and laid lifeless for 3 days. I mean, Jesus tells us that when his lifeless body reanimated and began to walk back to life, like literally walk out of that grave, he says that same spirit that animated his body, that brought life and spirit back to him, that same spirit is actually alive and at work in you. And he gives us the Spirit to actually do the hard work. And it's hard. But he says, hey, I'm going to be with you. And sometimes it's so hard because, when it comes to the parent teacher, sometimes you just got to let your kids like make the bad choices, right? And sometimes you actually have to watch them make the bad choices. That's what's so hard, which is one of the reasons I love this prayer that Ann Smith, who's, some of you have actually heard her pray this. Maybe she's even prayed it over you. I want to give it to you because it's so powerful. I think it's a great prayer for parents as we think about how do we raise our kids with purpose. She says this, she often prays over young people, God, would you help them to make enough mistakes to learn to trust you more, but protect them from any that have lifelong consequence? Now, that doesn't mean you and I don't have a role. Our role is to display grace and mercy and, to be encouraging and to set boundaries and to interpret, okay, when things don't go exactly the way that we expected, okay, where's God at in the midst of that story? Because a lot of our role is interpreting and helping our kids see where God is at. I want to share a picture of this with you that I observed this week that was just like a master class in parenting. And it came from kind of an unexpected source. So my daughter, she plays on the golf team at her high school, and she was out at a match this week. And as parents, we go to the matches, but like we can't coach them or like we can cheer. Like she's like, be quiet. Don't say anything. You can cheer. That's it. And so we're usually like 30, 50 yards away, just kind of mirroring her in the rough, kind of in the gallery. And right off the first tee, her first shot, like down and into the dirt, and she was not happy. And then her second shot, same thing, down and into the dirt. And you just saw her like shoulder slump. And so her coach, we couldn't do anything. We're like helpless right here, but her coach sees this and like carts over to her and starts having a conversation with her. The moment her coach gets to her, her shoulder slump, and my wife goes, oh my gosh, I think she's crying. And sure enough, she was crying. And so we didn't fully know what was going on in that moment. And so we watched them, and they kind of have an interaction, and she coaches her for a bit. And then at the end, her coach actually hugs her. And then our daughter kind of composes herself and goes on and finishes the hole. And so we didn't really know what all went down, but our heart was breaking a bit for her. And so a couple holes later, we actually crossed paths with her coach. She was like driving our way, and she's like, oh my gosh, Meredith. And my wife was like, oh, I think she started crying. And she said, yeah, she did. And we said, what was going on? She said, well, I just went up to her and I said, hey, are you okay? And she kind of shook her head, and she said, I said to her, is this about being mad at golf, or is this about being mad that your sister just went away to college and she's not at home with you anymore? And she said the moment I asked her that, she just started crying. And she said it's actually kind of both. And her coach looked at her and she said, well, here's the thing. You can't play golf and be mad at both of those things. You can either be mad at golf today, or you can be mad that your sister went away to college and she's not here with you, but you're going to have to choose. Which one are you going to choose? And she said, Meredith looked at her and she said, today I think I'm going to choose to let go of golf. And my sister's still kind of hurting. And her coach said, I think that's the right choice today. That's her golf coach, her high school golf coach. It's like, that's the right decision right here. She was actually interpreting for her in this moment what she's feeling and helping her realize, like, I can't go through life carrying all this. And then I asked her, do you want a hug before you go on? And she said, yeah. So she gave her a hug to assure her that I'm here, I hear you, I see you. I know this is hard. Meredith got up, she finished her hole, she went on par the next hole. We're like, what was that? And so we saw her coach again later, and she said, yeah, I saw that she started playing better, and I went over and I said, what's going on, Meredith? She said, well, I decided to take your suggestion and consider it. And her coach was like, it was not a suggestion. I'm your coach, I'm telling you, this is what you have to do. All right, but I'm telling you, this was a master class in identifying with a student, saying, okay, I'm going to help you interpret what's going on. There's bigger things going on, and sometimes the things that we think are big aren't so big. And I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to encourage you, and you're going to get through this. And this is from someone who is not a biological parent, but certainly knows what it means to raise young people. Man, as a parent, I was so glad she was there in that moment. One more. Proverbs 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do. You know what that means? That means trust him. And when you do that, you know what's going to happen? He's going to show you which path to take. See, the fruit of your labor is worth it. And he says, God says, if you will seek me, I'm going to guide you. And see, here's the other cool part about trusting God in your parenting. You can actually trust God to fill in the gaps. All right, you're not going to be the perfect parent. I hate to tell you, there's no perfect parents out there. My wife and I, we have moments where we just blow it, and we look at each other, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is going to leave a mark and probably require some counseling right there. I mean, it's just a reality. And so in those moments, we say, okay, God, how do I allow you and your grace to actually cover my outages? There's this beautiful moment in this movie where Reed, Mr. Fantastic, he's really struggling. You actually heard him say this in the trailer. He said, I should have known. There were some decisions he made that he felt like opened up some things that are going to create problems for his son. And he was really having a hard time with this. He said, hey, I should have known. I should have protected him from this. I should have got ahead of this. I should have had foresight on this. And he's just beating himself up. And his wife, Sue, finally grabs him by the shoulder. She says, Reed, listen, you got to give yourself a break. All right, quit beating yourself up. See, as parents, we want to get it right so bad, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we have to remember that when we trust God with our children, that he actually will fill in the gaps when we give it our best. It's amazing how this works. And then there's this beautiful moment that begins to happen at the end of this movie where we watch Sue, the invisible woman. She's actually fighting off some forces that are potentially going to, destroy the world and maybe even take away the potential of her son having a future. And she's fighting this off with all that's within her. I mean, with everything within her. I mean, with all of her strength, with everything she's got. I mean, she is pouring herself out in this moment. And it costs her. And all throughout this movie, Reed and Sue keep asking the question, okay, what is it that our son's here for? We know he's here for something unique. We know he brings something powerful to the world that the world needs. Little did they know, and you're going to have to see the movie to see how this plays out. Little did they know that the thing that their son, Franklin, brings to the world was the very thing that Sue was going to need when she poured herself out. Which is this crazy circle of how when we invest in our children, they actually bring value not only to others, but oftentimes back to us. And so it's kind of like this little mustard seed. I mean, just 2 milligrams. I mean, what might seem kind of small and even insignificant, maybe even nothing. And all of a sudden, surprise, it's everything. And God begins to grow something out of something that starts very, very small. So I want you to think about what your next steps are this weekend. We're all in different places. I know we all have different roles in raising or not raising or being a part of shaping the next generation. Maybe for you, these are some of your next steps on our connection card. Maybe for you, it's just, if you're an active parenting, saying, hey, God, I just want to acknowledge that my children are not mine. I mean, it's amazing how our perspective begins to change when we do that. Maybe for others of us, it's just, saying, hey, I want to lead on purpose. In fact, if that's where you are, I would just really encourage you to, lean into the fall journey, to put it on your calendar. I mean, come October, say, hey, how do I go all in on practicing the way, on growing in what it means to better follow Jesus with my life? One of the best gifts you can give to your kids is to be able to better practice the way so you can teach them what it means to practice the way. Maybe for some of us it's trusting. Maybe you're dealing with a situation and you're like, God, I just don't know what the outcome is right here. And you've never thought that God actually cares more about your children than you do. And so, God, I'm going to trust you to guide me. I'm going to trust you for clarity on what I need to do. I'm going to trust you to fill in the gaps in the times when I fail. I mean, trust is an amazing thing. And I think God honors the effort and he fills in those gaps. And those little seeds that are planted turned into something pretty amazing. Maybe for some of us, it's just returning next weekend. Maybe you're here and checking church out for the first time or checking faith out, and you're like, I'm not sure, but there's something kind of settling in my soul, and maybe it's just coming back next weekend. We'd love to see you next weekend. So I hope you'll take a step this week and just see how God perhaps shows up in your life. Let me pray for us. God, thank you for these stories. Thank you for these movies, these things that we see on the big screen that inspire us. They draw us in, and yet part of that is because there are things that reflect your character and the ways you operate in the world. And so I just thank you for being such a good parent. I mean, many of the things we've talked about today are the very same ways you parent us. They're the very same ways you coach and inspire and discipline and shape and motivate us. And God, I just want to thank you for never giving up on us, for never walking away, that in spite of ourselves, you continue to run after us and to encourage us and to shape us and mold us and help us become all that we can be. We want to be those kinds of people for those who are coming behind us. So help us to do that. Help us to know what to do with what we've heard today. And thank you for loving us. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Let's go ahead and stand. We're going to do one more song. Mark's going to lead us in a song that just talks about this kind of love that God has for us. And my hope is that kind of washes over you as you think about how you can continue to emulate that, or maybe even bring that purposely to those you're raising this week. Let's sing together.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Take a moment to follow our podcast on your preferred platform, and be sure to download our app to stay informed on everything happening here at Crosspoint. And if you like what you heard today, don't hesitate to share it with a friend that might need to hear it too.